Character writing has never been my strong suit. Most of my original characters I made when I was 12, 13, maybe 14, and anyone who's familiar with Destiny knows that while I've fleshed out the world building a ton, my characters are still a little flat, and I've struggled to keep a consistent story for them. For a long time, I've just accepted that I don't have the talent needed to create that kind of depth from scratch, and just continued refining things I was actually good at. But one day in late 2023, I decided to dust off an old OC who'd never had much of a personality, gave them a brand new look, and began writing a story for them that was almost completely untied from what I already had. And let me tell you, it was the best decision of my life. Let me introduce you all to my best written character to date, my muse, my beloved Juno Nightingale. Once upon a time, goodness knows how many years ago, I created Juno solely to be a character that I can place in whatever I pleased whenever I wanted. Their lack of limitation to Destiny meant that they already stood out a lot from the rest of my OCs, but they were without a story for many, many years until I one day decided it'd be fun to try and integrate them into my OC world while still keeping them separate from it in a way. In addition, I also had ideas for a new character named Simon, so I figured I'd kill two birds with one stone and give Juno an entire backstory with a human disguise named Simon. From there, things branched out more, and now I have an entirely new cast of characters and a bit of history for my magic system. Juno's backstory goes as such. On the 1st of August, 1836, an invisible magical entity randomly showed up in the busy streets of London, having no knowledge of who they were, what they were, where they came from, or where they are now. They could hear, see, smell, and feel everything around them, but they quickly realized that this was not reciprocated, that the people around them had no way of sensing their presence. They wandered around for a time, frightened like a lost child looking for their parents, except they were entirely aimless in their short journey through the city. They had an uncountable number of questions, but no idea where to look for answers, so they looked everywhere they could in the hopes that something would guide them. Soon enough, their wish was granted. They came across a 6-year-old girl and her family, and via telepathy, they learned that this girl, Elizabeth Nightingale, was having a lot of trouble making friends due to her magic being too weak to awaken on time. Both of her parents and her brother were light mages, so she knew she should be a light mage too, but because her magic still hadn't activated over a year after it was expected to, some of her peers feared she was actually a dark mage and avoided her because of it. She was considering creating an imaginary friend to fill the gap, which the at the time nameless being knew they could take advantage of. They followed her home, waiting for the perfect opportunity to reveal themselves to her. That night, when Elizabeth was alone and half asleep, they figured out how to take the form of a ghostly cyan figure, though they were barely able to maintain the correct humanoid shape and thus looked wispy like a small flame, and they could only create 2 white lights for eyes instead of an entire face. Elizabeth was startled at first. I mean, who wouldn't be? But they assured her that they had no ill intentions and explained that they were just a magic being sent to assist her. She realized pretty quickly that they wanted to befriend her, so the two of them discussed them being her imaginary friend as well as a sort of magic mentor, since they promised her that they could do so much more for her in that field than anyone else, even her own parents. She was excited, but they kept her quiet enough for her parents not to overhear and eventually encouraged her to try and get some sleep, saying that they'll hang out more the next day. Over time, the two bonded, with Elizabeth being the one to grant them the name Juno. She had been sharing her older brother's interest in Hellenistic mythology and wanted to name her new friend after one of the gods. She also helped them determine a proper appearance for themselves, especially once they became more comfortable with shapeshifting. Juno grew to see Elizabeth as something of a foster daughter. They cared for her like one, always wanting to help and protect her. Some of their favorite things to do with her included helping her learn new spells and reading stories to her. Unfortunately, since Elizabeth only ever saw them as an imaginary friend, she eventually grew out of wanting to talk to them, and they were left to trail behind her, invisible to everyone once more, hoping in vain that she would one day want to reconnect. It wasn't until Juno had existed for around 19 years that they finally decided to let go. Creating the persona of Simon O'Donnell, Juno decided to pose as a human light mage in order to learn more about human society and about magic. I'm going to be referring to them as Simon for a time, just know that they're the same person. At the time, magic was not nearly as well understood as it is today, with many ancient ideas about it, such as the one that dark magic was evil, still widespread. Simon never understood the binary black and white view humans in general had maintained. After all, he knew that he broke those very binaries. His magic was neither light nor dark, and although he had no issue disguising himself as a man, he knew that he was not truly male nor female, but something else entirely. He was always incredibly stubborn and very skeptical, refusing to believe many of what he deemed to be the church's ideas on magic or even on people. He never even pretended to believe in a god, though he was not ever vocal about his atheism, especially in the years before he became nationally well known. Knowing that the body he created for himself was mortal like any other, but that his spirit would live forever, he dedicated his life not only to researching magic for his own sake, but also to sharing his knowledge with the world, hoping to one day become a pioneer of sorts in his field. He had two main goals in all this. The first, the one he placed priority on throughout his life as Simon, was to truly understand magic at its core, the fundamentals, for he believed that knowing what is at the root of magic is the best way for researchers to learn how to truly push it to its limits, as so many of his peers were so focused on. The second, more selfish goal was to figure out more about himself and the universe through his research. He kept his identity as Juno a complete secret, but he did not fear to question the status quo, something which helped him make a name for himself, for better and for worse. It was in his mid-20s that he met not only his best friend, Warren Hoffman, but also the prestigious Eastwood family. Warren, an old friend of Kent and Esther Eastwood, was another magical scientist and an engineer who had a strong interest in artificial magic. In the modern day, many know artificial magic mainly for artificial sources, magic stored in items which someone who is not a natural mage can channel and spellcast with. These things operate by enchanting an item so that it is able to continuously generate magic, but that sort of technology was not a thing early on. Artificial magic is simply defined as magic being used or existing in inanimate objects, which, for those in the industrial era, mainly means magic integrated into factory machinery, sources not being the machines themselves, but the mages who enchanted them. Warren was well known for his continual efforts to make the process of enchantment easier, in part on the mage's end by discovering easier spells, and in part on the recipient's end by figuring out ways to make the magic last longer and work more efficiently. The Eastwoods were a very wealthy family in England who were also known for having very powerful mages. Kent, for example, was considered to be the strongest in the country before Simon rose to fame, and he was known by his peers as one of the most knowledgeable, again, pre-Simon. Where Warren focused on artificial magic and its utilities, Kent focused on natural magic and its effects on people. He, along with many of the people he worked with, was a very firm believer in the idea that dark magic was demonic, however, so needless to say, a lot of his findings were pretty biased, especially by today's standards. Him and his wife Esther had 2 children, their eldest being a light mage named Lydia, and their youngest having been born powerless. I won't get into too much since this is mostly about Simon, but Kent and Esther had very high expectations for their kids in pretty much all walks of life, as well as strict punishments if they did not meet those standards. Simon first met both Warren and James, who went by Jessica at the time, on a train ride to a formal party the Eastwoods were hosting. The 3 of them got along very well, with both of them expressing their interest in Simon's work to his surprise. He soon learned that it was thanks to James and Lydia that he got invited. The parents hadn't really wanted him to join in. When he met Kent and Esther, it all became more clear. They were courteous, of course, but he could tell that they were not very interested in speaking to him, even as Warren introduced him to them. Kent especially seemed almost like he was avoiding Simon, and although he was wary of making assumptions, deep down he knew exactly why. The funny thing is, while Kent would very quickly become his enemy, Simon found himself growing ever closer with James and Warren. Warren still tried to restart his friendship with Kent, as he'd been away for some years, but he eventually realized that trying to befriend both of them just wouldn't work, and he ended up siding with Simon a lot more. The 2 were almost like brothers, but they were known for being excellent co-workers, with Simon's research into the foundation of magic aiding Warren's projects. It was the 2 of them who became the first humans to create a self-sustaining artificial source. The demons did it first, but don't worry about it, let them have their moment. James and Simon bonded over their shared interests and the fact that neither of them really fit into societal norms. Both of them were genderqueer, after all. And regular queer. Specifically for each other. The 2 of them getting together ended up being the final nail in the coffin for the relationship between James and his parents. They hated it so much that they fully disowned him. James tried not to care. He has his sister and his boyfriend, and that's all he needed. But to say it didn't hurt would be to lie. Simon proved to be an extremely loyal and doting boyfriend, equally so as a husband. Manipulate, mansplain, male life. Jumping ahead a bit, Simon O'Donnell becomes something of a household name. Enough people held him in high regard that his ideas and research started being more widely accepted, though there was still enough pushback for him to be considered somewhat infamous in his day. Not only did his commitment to treating magic as merely a natural tool and not something brought by some higher power upset those who held tightly onto their rigid religious beliefs, but so too did his openness about his atheism. His rivalry with Kent also drew a lot of attention, both good and bad. In addition, he generally came across as cold, even sinister at times to the people who didn't know him well. He was always asocial, petty, and a bit judgmental. His voice was flat and he had a strong case of resting bitch face, and his stubbornness was one of the many traits which made it difficult for him to work with certain people. Still others found him admirable for his kindness and the fact that he never looked down on people for something they could not control. Some who had met him in person found themselves intimidated by his sheer power, while those he was close with felt protected by it. Some of his contributions to the field of magical science include the better categorization and identification of the basic magic types, the discovery of raw magic and magic energy, the two components of basic magic, and the discovery of the third basic magic type, duel. These three tend to be what most people think of when you hear his name. Despite their achievements, however, when the body of Simon died, Juno had not felt very accomplished. They wouldn't see the results of their work for some time, and they had failed to reach their most important goal, in part due to the fact that they gave themselves a human identity in the first place. They decided from then on not to limit themselves anymore, and instead explore the multiverse on their own. This ended up working out well in their favor, as not only are they able to discover more than they ever could as a mere human, but they also got to witness the development of the Midnight Empire. The long and short of the Empire is that a version of DD from an AU colloquially known as the Midnight AU set up an inter-universal organization dedicated to the protection and study of all universes in Destiny. This reach was soon stretched into other multiverses, especially after Destiny and Alderaan began to merge and other multiverses were discovered. Her reason for all that she's done has a lot to do with her own world. The Midnight AU, as well as another one known as Blinding Light, represent two of the worst endings to the Celestial Magic's reunion, the worst outcomes of the Great Prophecy, if you will. Both are similar in their apocalyptic environments, though Midnight's is one of darkness and Blinding Light's is one of, well, light. Not wanting Destiny Prime to turn out even remotely close to either world, Midnight AU's DD began studying the other universes in the hopes of figuring out the optimal path Destiny Prime would need to take. Once she started extending her reach to protecting the other worlds from worsening just like the Midnight AU had, Juno took an interest in her and her goals, and much like how they did with Elizabeth, they appeared to Dee and offered to lend their assistance if she let them into her empire. Dee was a little hesitant to accept at first, but Juno soon proved himself to be a knowledgeable and trustworthy companion, so she agreed to let them be an advisor to her. Now that they're a part of the Midnight Empire, they have more access to anything they could ever want about the other worlds. They frequently oversee subworld development, expeditions into worlds outside Destiny, certain internal arrangements, among other things, all under the command of their Empress. But of course, they take whatever opportunity they can to explore and experiment on their own. They feel justified in doing so since their goals extend beyond the Empress's scope. Where she keeps her focus on the multiverses, Juno wishes to know what lies beyond. They still don't know their true origins after all, but every new adventure brings them closer and closer. Will they ever reach their ultimate goal? Who knows? So that's pretty much all I've got so far. Funny how, in only 2 years, I've created a character that has more depth and complexity than the ones I'd had for creeping up on a decade now. Wow. They've inspired me so much both artistically and in learning about history and character writing. They've kind of become my favorite character a little bit, as much as I hate to see it, but whatever, I love them.